Thank you. Good afternoon, and as Ada said, we're really happy to see you all here, and we're excited about today's talk, which you see the title of behind us here, Perspectives on Open, a dialogue about access, collaboration, and career advancement. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our two distinguished speakers, Erin McKiernan and Town Peterson. Dr. Erin McKiernan is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Psychology at the Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Canada, and visiting scholar at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She received her master's and doctorate degrees in physiological sciences at the University of Arizona. Erin works primarily in experimental and theoretical neuroscience and is active internationally in advocating for open access, open data, open science, and women in science. Town Peterson is a University of Kansas distinguished professor of ecology and evolutionary biology and senior curator at the Biodiversity Institute, which many of you know is the Natural History Museum just across the street. He earned his master's and PhD at the University of Chicago and has since built a remarkable corpus of scholarship, including a patent, books, and several hundreds of articles in peer-reviewed journals. Additionally, Town serves on dozens of local, national, and international academic committees. His research focuses on aspects of geography, of the geography of biodiversity, particularly on tropical ornithology and systematics. And Town is very active in mentoring graduate students and postdoctoral researchers, and so is not divorced from the issues that early career researchers face. So in front of us today, we have two researchers at very different points in their careers who've both been highly visible in advocating for openness in their work and that of their colleagues. So we wanted to break away from this sort of standard stage on the stage presentation format. So Town and Erin will have a dialogue to discuss the benefits and potential concerns related to publishing open, particularly for early career researchers and graduate students. So please help me in welcoming them to today's talk. So just to get the ball rolling, I'll start you with the first question, and then I'll sit down and they'll take it from there. Perhaps you can share with us how you came to openness as a professional value, what pushed you away from doing things the way they've always been done. And Erin, I'd suggest that you start.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Thanks so much for coming. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here. So I guess I got started with open advocacy when I moved to Puerto Rico in 2011. And so I, of course, knew that, access to knowledge was a problem in parts of the world, but, I had experienced it on a very limited level. But when I got to Puerto Rico and I saw students and faculty there, I saw on a bigger scale the problems that people in other countries were facing in terms of accessing scientific research. So I worked at a fairly small teaching college, but it was part of the University of Puerto Rico, which is the biggest public university there. And they had very limited funds for subscriptions, which meant that we had virtually no access to a lot of the newest results in science. And this obviously has a big impact on your ability to do research. But I think the most heartbreaking thing for me was watching my students. So I was working with a lot of undergraduates who were just starting out in research and forming their new interests, their new passions in particular subjects, trying to find out more, and they kept hitting these paywalls, these roadblocks that they weren't allowed to have access to a huge percentage of the scientific literature. And for them, this was very frustrating, and on my end, I saw how this was really slowing down their learning and slowing down their training process. I saw how frustrating it was for me as a teacher and for my colleagues to go through this. And so in about a year, I moved to Mexico and had the same ideas reinforced. So I worked at an Institute of Public Health, which was federally funded, but had very limited funds for subscriptions. And so I think in total, the access to the literature in that institution was about 140 journals, subscription journals. Considering we have around 30,000 in the world, this was a very tiny percentage of the literature. And did not include some of the major journals like Nature Medicine, PNAS, things that researchers in public health need to have access to. They need to see the latest results that are being published in these journals. And they didn't have that. And of course, that was a huge limiting factor in both their ability to carry out research and their ability to train their students. And so for me, seeing that firsthand was the point at which I decided that I had to make a commitment to share both my own work, but also to kind of try to convince other researchers that this is a thing that we should be doing. This is something that we should be actively working on, increasing public access to knowledge, and not just within universities, not just within institutions. So there are a lot of people outside academic institutions that need access as well and aren't getting it. And I think the more that we can raise that awareness, the better off we will be. Yeah.
So perhaps my experience is quite parallel. In graduate school, I ended up spending quite a bit of time in Mexico, and ended up spending a couple of months essentially trying to write up a couple of papers in a lab with some good friends in the National Autonomous University. And really, it was a very frustrating experience because data, knowledge to date, and literature were essentially all completely off limits to me, to us. And so over and over and over again, my colleagues and I found ourselves saying, oh, I guess we'll have to wait and get a copy of that paper, or oh, I guess we'll have to wait and see those specimens or find out where somebody in the past has caught this species. So it was a very limiting experience, especially back 25 years. Chapter 2 of my beginning in openness was actually only about 10 years ago when a family member ended up in the hospital in pretty serious condition. And I needed to know about a particular sort of brain damage very quickly and deeply. Unfortunately, in that part of the family, I'm the medical advisor, which means they're in really bad shape. So I'm trying to go to the primary literature. And literally, I had to drive back from the hospital in Kansas City and go to my office, because only in my office could I see 2/3, 3/4 of the literature that I needed to see. And then finally, kind of more on a fun note, I was talking with a colleague downtown a number of years ago, and I thought, oh, I really need to show this colleague a figure from a paper that I wrote a couple years before. And I'm in a coffee shop downtown, and I do what we all do in our offices all the time. You just go to the journal site and pull up your paper, and I was given the opportunity to type in my Visa number and pay $35. But get this, for access to my own intellectual product. And I found that to be very, very shocking, because it was something that I had done, and it was something that I had worked on for years and years, and yet somebody else is charging me money for access to my own work. So that aligned with a lot of movement here at KU, both in the provost's office and in the libraries. I'm looking around the room and looking at some old companions in arms about these issues. It was 5-10 years ago. It was quite a fertile ground on which to start thinking a lot about open access. So there are a couple of perspectives for you on why open. But now essentially what we'll do is I'm gonna take the opportunity to ask Erin a bunch of questions. And at a couple of points in this process, I'll give you all a chance to ask questions as well. But essentially the theme of how Ada and Josh set this up is I'm the old guy at the end of my career, and Erin is the young person at the beginning of her career. But hopefully what we can do is do a little bit of reflection on how to design the beginnings of a career. And I'm looking around the room and seeing a lot of people who are grad students, postdocs, early faculty. And so this is a little bit of maybe experience to toss to you all about what things can you do to kind of optimize the hard work that you're going to do regardless. So to start this off, Erin, you're kind of at the end of the student phase and at the beginning of the I'll call it professional phase. I took the opportunity of looking at your Google Scholar profile, 12-ish major publications. Your research is where it is, and in some senses you can't speed that up. I know you do pretty intensive experimentation and modeling. So being where you are as you go into this kind of next chapter of your professional career, how do you build a name for yourself as a young scientist?
So I should clarify, first in the interest of transparency. So as you know, Google Scholar tracks some things that are not peer-reviewed articles. So I actually, in terms of my peer-reviewed articles, only have 4. And so, but a lot of those other outputs are posters or presentations or articles that were written in various media outlets. And I think it's great that Google Scholar tracks those too, because as we know, our scholarly output is not only peer-reviewed articles. But I mean, for me, I'm not going to be publishing a high volume. That's not the way that I'm going to be creating visibility for myself. I've also made a commitment to not publish in certain closed access journals, like I won't submit any work to Nature or Science or Cell or anything like that. And so that's also not the way that I'm going to create visibility for myself. So the way that I have done this is by just being very open with my work, which I think is actually an excellent way to build a name for yourself. It sounds so simple, but really the idea is in those early stages, the more readers you can get, the more people you can get looking at your work, the better your visibility, the quicker you build a name for yourself, even if the volume of your work is not that large. So I've kind of integrated a few different approaches. One is first of all, publishing in an open access journal. And that idea is just, again, the more people who can read my work, the more potential for them to see the possible impact or cite that work. And then integrating that with a social media approach. So tweeting that work out, tweeting those links out, copying various researchers that I know are in the field, using particular hashtags that I know others in the field are searching. That has actually been a really good way for me to connect with researchers I might not otherwise have connected with and get them to know a little bit about what I'm doing. And then another aspect has been blogging. So I write about my research on my website. And what I try to do there is not just write for neuroscientists, because hopefully my work can have an impact outside of just that immediate circle of academics. But if you're going to have that impact, you have to write in terms that everybody can understand. And so that's been actually an excellent exercise for me in not just making my work accessible, but making it understandable, opening it up in other ways, and writing in terms that everybody hopefully can understand. So between kind of those three things, I think that I've managed to increase the visibility of my work. I don't work in a high profile field either. So I was doing a lot of work in Drosophila. Well, there's a limited group of people in the world who care about fruit flies. And, but, again, you can reach out to people that you might not necessarily have connected with if your work is open and being discussed openly. And I've found potential collaborators as well through my blog and through Twitter that I might not have found otherwise. So that's been a very effective approach for me.
So you and I both work in biology, but kind of in different extremes of the field. I tend to work on geographic scales, and I assume you tend to work on microscopic scales. And so I didn't really know much about your field. I got onto the internet and started playing. With Google Metrics, there is not a category for neuroscience. So I looked for the one that seemed closest, and it was biophysics.
Okay, yeah. that's a
Okay,
good
and
one.
that, I guess you could potentially imagine yourself in a department of biophysics at some point.
Yeah, in fact, I will be entering soon a Department of Physics under biophysics category. Yeah, so that's actually exactly what I do.
So
Yeah.
here's your arena of journals. Number one, according to Google Metrics, is Biophysical Journal, owned by Elsevier. Number two, Current Opinion in Structural Biology, owned by Elsevier. Number three, Biochimica et Biophysica Acta, Elsevier. Number four, Journal of Biomechanics, Elsevier.
We're sensing a theme here.
Number five, I'll get to a little bit of variation in a moment. Biochimica and at Biophysica Acta, another version, Elsevier. Annual Review of Biophysics is from Annual Reviews, also of like reputation to Elsevier as far as openness. Journal of Photochemistry and Photobiology, Elsevier. And so finally, in eighth place, Photochemical and Photobiological Sciences, Royal Society of Chemistry. I don't know if you do stuff about light.
Not so much.
So given your, I mean, I essentially first heard about you when I think Ada came back from a meeting and said, there's this woman working in Mexico who has sworn never to publish in closed access journals. What are you going to do in that field?
How do I do that? Yeah. So I can add a little bit to that in the field of neuroscience. So I'm not sure exactly how these fall in rank, but I can tell you that in general terms, nature and science are at the top of that list. Not so far down is Nature Neuroscience and Neuron, Elsevier, and several other journals in there that are all closed access in the top 10 at least. Yeah, so there are a lot of closed venues in my field, and unfortunately a lot of people who believe that those are the venues you have to publish in to be successful. I don't believe that. I think that there are a lot of excellent options. So there are a lot of PLOS journals, there are a lot of Biomed Central journals, Hindawi journals that are fully open access. And there are a lot of other journals, not necessarily Elsevier, that are not fully open access but have great liberal, what we call green open access policies. That means you can publish in their journal. It's not open access through their journal, but you are allowed to archive a copy in some type of open website, open repository, your own institutional repository. And that's another way for people to be open with their work. I've chosen not to go that route because I think it's really important for me to invest my time and my resources and my effort in supporting fully open access journals that are working to increase openness in my field. But so far I haven't had a problem finding venues. So I've published in BMC Neuroscience. That's been great. I've published in PeerJ. I find them to be fantastic. I've submitted, although not yet successfully, work to PLOS One. And I put together, this was very important for me earlier on in the stage, was to put together a list of my publishing options to say, here are all the journals in which I can publish my work. What does their licensing look like? What are their publishing fees? And that list has served not only as a good resource for me, but also as a resource to share with my mentors, my PIs, my collaborators, and say, when they come to me and say, well, you've refused to publish in any Elsevier journal, because I've signed that boycott to say I won't publish in any Elsevier journal, even if it's open access. Where are we going to publish? Well, I have that list ready to show collaborators and to show them how many options there are. And, if they're also concerned about impact factor, I'm not a fan of impact factor. I don't think this is a metric that says anything about quality, but I know that there are a lot of people out there that are concerned because this is still a metric that's being used in evaluation. So I put together another list that had journals with moderate to high impact factors, just to show collaborators and PIs, well, hey, we have a lot of options, and we do. And I haven't had a shortage of options to publish in. I've been fortunate in that sense. Yeah.
So every so often in your career, you come across some result that's really, really snazzy,
Yeah.
and either you will be tempted, or maybe not you, maybe all of your colleagues
Yeah.
will be tempted to send it to Science or Nature. And I can, I've published in Science and Nature. It's been a while. But I can tell you that the publicity and the
The
visibility
temptation is there.
is really good. They do the publicity very well.
Yeah.
What do you do? Especially when all your colleagues are like, no, 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 this is a science paper.
Yeah, so I can understand that pressure, and I can understand that temptation, especially for early career researchers wanting to make a name for themselves. So I think one important thing that I do is have, before we have the Science or the Nature paper, before we have any result, I sit down and I discuss with collaborators, look, you need to know this is my pledge that I've made both publicly and personally. This is my policy. This is where I am willing to submit and where I'm not willing to submit. Speak now or forever hold your peace. So are you willing to collaborate with me under those conditions? And of course, they have that opportunity to then say, well, what if we got a science paper like result? And I will say, well, I won't submit there. I think we have a lot of other options. Are you okay with that? And they can decide at that moment to walk away. To this date, I have not had a collaborator walk away under those conditions, but I think it's very important that those discussions happen early. Because if you then have that result and you've already had that discussion, there's no conflict there. People came in with that expectation that this is the way things are going to go. As far as the high profile and publicity, so I think it's really interesting that most recently there was a new discovery in the field of, ancestral humans, and they made a big discovery, and they could have published that in Nature or Science, and I believe they published in eLife. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly? But they published in a fully open access journal, and they got a huge media response, huge, and so I don't think it's true anymore to say that high-profile research should only go to Nature and Science, should only go to those closed access journals, and those are the only ones that can give us kind of this big splash and this big impact. I think there are several examples. There was another one in Dinosaur Research a few years ago, where they published not only the article in a fully open access journal, but they published the data and several things online, and the response to that in the media was amazing. And I think it helps when the public can not only read the media's description, but can actually go and access that article themselves and check out the new science. I think that's a very important aspect of interacting with the public. And I think we see some very nice journals in the open access space like eLife that are doing very well in promoting very high profile research to the public.
So there's a phrase that sometimes I don't like it, but publish or perish, which is to say, yeah, we're all under some level of pressure to get those papers out there.
Sure.
Maybe you've got a couple chapters of your dissertation that you'd still like to get out.
I do.
And I've got, a few papers that I really would like to finish up and never get them done. If I want to raise, I should probably just leave the state of Kansas. But it would also help if I were publishing actively. And as you crank your lab up, wherever you crank it up, you're going to have more and more activity. And you'll have your students publishing, and some of my students are here. And about a quarter of the visits I get from my students each day are, I'd like to go to this conference, can you help me with $600? And I try to make sure that the answer is always yes. And then, the next student is, and I need $800, and I need, and so I wonder, could you comment a bit about, doesn't this get expensive, given that a lot of the open access journals, what's the average, around $1,400?
Something like that.
doesn't that get beyond you, especially as you have a group of 5 or 6 really active students?
Yeah, so I mean, cost is definitely a concern for researchers moving into the open publishing world, and I'm going to apologize to people who are in the lunch session, because I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here, but I think that there are a few factors involved here. One is we have to kind of get rid of this idea that open publishing only means open access journals. That's a personal commitment that I've made, but that is not something that I would force on anybody else, and I think it is perfectly legitimate to say, publish in the journal that you think is right for your field, for your budget, for your lab, as long as you make a free copy of that available somewhere, right? Your institutional repository, an open repository, your own website, make that work accessible. It doesn't matter where it was originally published as long as it is accessible in some form. And I think the current estimate is something like 80% of journals will allow you to self-archive some version of your work openly. So that shouldn't be a restriction. And in that case, you know, if there's a journal that you really want to publish in and the cost is zero, you know, great, go ahead and do that. And you can be open with your work at a cost of $0. So I think that's, first of all, a very important thing to point out. Second of all, there are a lot of especially new innovative publishers, digital born, coming onto the market that have found a way to optimize their submission process, their production costs, so that they've estimated the cost for producing a single article is around $200 or $300, and their article processing charges reflect that. So it costs you maybe $100 to $300 to be able to publish an article. I don't think that is unreasonable, and in fact, in some cases, publishing in a closed access journal costs you more because there are submission fees, there are page fees. In my field, a particular journal that will go unnamed has charged $500 per color figure. So if I have a full manuscript with several color figures, that can add up very, very quickly to more than it would cost me to publish in an open access journal. And usually those open access journals, because they're digital only, they don't have any fees on color figures. So that's another myth, that publishing in these closed access journals is necessarily free. It's often not. And so, yeah, so zero cost options, low cost options. I don't have a research budget, let alone a publishing budget, so I can't pay these high APCs. And I think we should be encouraging publishers to bring those down. And the way that I've survived in publishing openly is using a few different options. One being these low-cost publishers, so PeerJ has been a great option for me. It's a $99 one-time membership fee, and you can publish one article a year for life, assuming it passes peer review, right? For me, when I first came to Mexico, I was teaching high school mathematics. And you can imagine that the salary was not particularly high. And I still wanted to publish my work, and that $99 fee was something that I could easily pay out of pocket and continue to publish in a high-quality journal in an open fashion without it kind of breaking my bank account. The other one I've used is institutional memberships. So a lot of institutions have memberships to particular open access journals like Biomed Central or PeerJ, and they'll help you pay those fees. So I worked at Arizona State University. They had a full membership with Biomed Central. I managed to publish an article there for $0 out of pocket to me. A lot of institutions have OA funds. I know this institution has an OA fund that will help their students and faculty publish openly. So look for those resources, talk to your libraries, because a lot of the time the libraries can help you find those funds. And there are databases. Nature has a great page online where you can search whether your funder has a policy or whether your institution has a policy to help you pay for those open fees. So I think there are lots of different ways, lots of different resources for people to tap into, lots of different options. And for me, at least so far, even working on a very, very limited budget, cost has not been a limiting factor to me publishing openly. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to see if people in the audience have some questions. Then I have some more questions for you.
Super.
We've got essentially laid out until 4:30, everybody, so we've got kind of plenty of time for some interchange. But just to kind of round out a first round of questions for you, at some point you'll be a full professor or investigadora titular.
Yeah.
You'll probably end up like changing your hair color like I did, you know. What's academic publishing going to look like? Will there be journals still? I mean, let's say we're talking somewhere between 10 and 20 years into the future.
Gosh, I hope it doesn't take me that long to get tenure.
I didn't say tenure, I said full professor.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I'm not sure I have a great answer to that question. I think we're seeing a lot of innovation in the scholarly publishing space, and we're certainly seeing people in the open space that are saying, let's burn it all down and start over. Let's just get rid of all the journals. I'm not necessarily advocating that approach, but I think one thing I would like to see us move away from in the next 10 years is this idea of static publishing. So we publish an article and it stays that way forever and ever, and that's the end of it. No, that research doesn't work that way, first of all. And so we need a scholarly publishing system that kind of reflects the more dynamic nature of research. So I think we've seen some interesting kind of beginning innovation into the idea of living documents. And so if anyone's familiar with F1000 research, so they did this thing called Living Figures, they've piloted, where they published the article with the original data set, but the article, that data set, the figure is such that anybody can add their data set onto that figure. And it changes over time with the new data that gets added to it. There's version control, so you can go back to any particular date and see how that looked. Each one of the groups that adds new data to that figure gets a contribution. They get their own DOI, I believe. And so the results are evolving over time within this scholarly publishing format. And I'd like to see that happen with a lot more of our formats on a bigger scale, to have these evolving docs, to have the idea that a research product is never really finished. How often do we actually just finish a project and say, yeah, I have no more questions, I'm completely done with that, and just walk away? That doesn't really happen that often. And so I would love to see more publishers or even more open source developers working on getting that type of reality to be more widespread in the next 10 years. Yeah.
That's a very good comment, because it's been 25 years since I finished my PhD, and I keep waiting for that project to end. It never does.
Yeah, I mean, projects, that's not the way our science works. And it doesn't always work linearly either. Like, okay, we go this way, and we see something, and that creates a whole new question. Now we go this way, and so can we create something that sort of represents that kind of stochastic nature of research? It would be great to see.
Of course, all the doctoral students in the audience are thinking, oh no,
God,
I
never
thought this was
ends.
over in a few more years. Any questions from the audience for Erin? Yeah, hold on one second.
We have a mic
microphone.
coming to you, yeah.
Sorry.
So my question is, what about when you're asked to provide a review for an article, kind of the flip side of it? I've wondered about this because on one hand you are providing a service for your colleagues, but on the other hand, you know, you can be kind of contributing to the system that you have, you know, ethical contradictions with.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I personally, in addition to pledging to share my own work, have pledged only to dedicate my editorial or my review time to fully open access journals. So if I get an invitation that's not from an open access journal, I will turn them down, and I will tell them why I'm turning them down. I think that's also important, that, and you mentioned this earlier, that they hear, yeah, I'm turning you down because I don't believe you are doing the right things in terms of opening up scholarly communication. And I would say that's something that I encourage a lot of people to think about, you know, whether they're ready to take that step, because this is time that we invest. We are not paid for this time. This is our volunteer work, and it's extremely valuable time. And we should make sure that we're donating that time to people who we believe are promoting the same type of causes that we support. Yeah.
Question from Ada.
Thank you. First, this has been wonderful so far, but I wonder, Town, if you'd like to address any of the questions, or I can pick out the final one that you asked Erin, And what would your answer be for 10, 15, 20 years? What would you like to see the scholarly publishing world be like?
Perhaps I'm kind of less vision on the horizon level, but certainly one tendency that I see already is that journals per se become less and less crucial. 25 years ago, and a lot of people in the room will remember this, you would wait for the next issue of the several key journals in your field. And, for me, it was the Auk and the Wilson Bulletin, all these crazy sounding bird journals. But there would always, there's the Bulletin of the British Ornithologists Club, which was the best journal just to sit and read. And so I would, every Friday afternoon make my way to the library and go and sit for a few hours and read through the most recent issues of these crucial 3, 4, 5 journals. And that's going away pretty quickly, because not only do we have our disciplinary journals, but then we have these kind of more general journals. In my field, it's evolution, ecology, things like that, these kind of high-end journals where one paper in 20 is something that's in my area of interest. But that's probably one paper per issue that I really need to pay attention to. And now what we're seeing are these journals that kind of cut across science, PLOS One, PeerJ, eLife, things like that. And so they're not in any way packaged by theme or discipline, except in these really broad disciplines. And so kind of following that trajectory, it feels like what matters is the digital object. And so I guess my view 10, 20 years into the future is that we will probably have gotten beyond this idea of thematic packaging, and that instead we'll get to a different level, which will be packaging based on magnitude, or is this a short research note or a big monograph, and that'll involve getting rid of these pesky impact factors. Probably a lot of you have heard about impact factors, but you may or may not know. I'll throw it out there just to save Aaron the trouble. Impact factors are a game that is run by one of the competitors. Right? It's a publishing firm, Thomson Reuters, that decides on the impact factors. And they have a formula, but the formula can be played with. And so really imagine a soccer game where one team gets to do the refereeing. It's not going to be a fair game. But worse yet, those impact factors are at the level of journal. And so you publish in Science, it's got to be an important paper. And surely there are papers in Science that have been cited tens of thousands of times. And there are other papers in Science that never get cited or that are just wrong. Quality of your work is not reflected in the impact of the journal where you publish it. Some of the most crucial papers in science have been published in journals that have no or low impact, according to Thomson Reuters. So I'm guessing 10, 20 years in the future, we're beyond all that. And that our impact, without any capital letters, our impact in our field will be something that is decided on based on, I think what it is how many descendant papers come out of the papers we publish. Sometimes you throw an idea out there and that's the end of it. Okay? And other times you throw an idea out there and it gives rise to dozens of future projects in your own lab, but also in other people's labs. And I would hope that we get to a point where we're dealing with measures of impact that are along those lines. You look like you had something
I
you want
do
to
have
say.
so I have a question in terms, well, I was going to ask you that. So in the future, let's hope we move away from this packaging idea, this label of, it's quality or not quality depending on where it's published, which I think it has been very detrimental to science. But assuming that we do, currently a lot of our evaluation metrics are based on this idea of packaging, not just the impact factor, but, the prestige, which is sometimes associated with that impact factor of where you publish. So if we move away from that packaging, how are we evaluating people? And then you say, well, okay, the number of descendant papers, right? But I was thinking of kind of one of the extreme examples. So take the Wakefield paper on the MMR vaccine, right? So that has launched a number of descendant papers, so to speak, but not because the science was good. Mm-hmm. In fact, on the contrary, because it was very bad, it was fraudulent, and but we have spent however many years trying to show that it was fraudulent. And so, how would you kind of quantify these issues in terms of, well, a large number of descendant papers doesn't necessarily mean your science was good. In fact, it might mean the opposite. How do you deal with evaluation metrics?
That one paper had quite a bit of impact. Again, not because it was a great paper, but because it was a greatly bad paper. But after you publish something like that, you probably don't publish many more of the same sort.
That's true, especially if they run you out of.
So I think it's kind of like, in rock music, if you look back, 60s and 70s, there were people who had, a dozen platinum albums, and there were people who had one top 40 song. This is not my usual set of comparisons, is it? Who's made the bigger contribution to music?
Right. But, that requires a certain longevity of career to see that, right? And so we have early career researchers here. So how, and this is something that I struggle with, and so I'm asking for guidance on this too, is how do you kind of evaluate people who have just started their career, who don't have those longevity measures in place, and how can we kind of recommend to administrators or tenure and promotion committees ways in which we could better the evaluation metrics for early career researchers?
I think very clearly it's a matter of being multifactorial. We had a search a few years ago in my department, and the search committee, at least in the faculty meeting, said, we had 35 applicants, which if you define a search rather narrowly, you get 30, 50 applicants. So they had 35 applicants, and of these applicants, 5 or 6 of them had had Nature or Science papers. And so they defined the shortlist on that basis. And I think it was a big mistake, because you're using a single event and a single metric. And so I personally, at the level of, picking my graduate students, for example, it's really good to see a published paper. If somebody's an undergraduate and has managed to publish, or if somebody's a master's student and has published the thesis, that's a very good sign. It's not the only good sign. But when we're searching for a new faculty member, or when we're looking at somebody for promotion to associate professor, which brings tenure, I really think it's a matter of getting multiple lines of evidence. So yeah, I'm hoping they're not publishing just in the Journal of the Kansas Academy of Sciences. Nothing against the Journal of Kansas Academy of Sciences. I'm hoping that they are publishing in, let's say, challenging forums. And certainly, PLOS journals can be quite challenging. Which is to say, I'm not saying Science and Nature, I'm saying just high-end forums. I want to see the person's work be central to current discussions. As we have a wasp. Yeah, exactly.
They're mini drones, they're spying on us.
And it's probably been genetically modified to have a rather fatal venom. So I want to see multiple lines of evidence, especially the farther you go into your career. You know, full professor, I want to see you being invited to give plenaries, and I want to see you being recognized on an international scale, not, you know, just a national scale or a regional scale. So the bad news is for promotion and tenure and hiring committees, it's more work.
There's no quick fix, yeah.
There is no easy metric where you say, up 32.8. No. 35? Yes. So that was kind of in the middle of our opportunity for the audience to ask questions.
Sorry.
One more question before I go back to my list. Jorge. Hold on.
First one is whether you see a role for the conventional journals published in paper by the big houses, not the journals published by learned societies and things like that I believe they will keep being serving and being valid, but whether you think that in that future that you were imagining, there is room for this Elsevier's and Blackwells and Wilsons. That's the first part. The other question is I would like to emit a slightly contrarian opinion on this ideal paper which keeps evolving, because in my view that is some sort of perpetual state of present and I don't see the history, and I really would like to see the history of an idea and the history of a data set and what was thought 20, 50 years ago and then later and then later. And if we allow the paper to keep evolving all the time, maybe there is a way to keep the history, but it's going to be much more difficult.
So I'll just address that second part. So I would like to see version control on these living documents. So similar to what they're doing with the F1000 figures. Yes, that figure evolves with new data sets, but you can go back and track it to any particular date prior and see what it looked like. And so I'm not advocating at all that these documents would evolve without any type of history. They should have history, but we fortunately have really great tools for doing that. I mean, anyone who's worked with Git or GitHub, right? We have the tools for documenting that version control. And in fact, now we even have DOI versioning. So each version gets a new DOI and can be very carefully tracked. So all of that history is preserved. And I think, no, but I agree that that is key, that the history is preserved along with the dynamic nature of the document. The first part of the question, so I'm not going to advocate necessarily taking down particular publishers. Do we still have that WASP drone anywhere?
I think it's crawling up your neck.
But I think there's a place for them if they can innovate. If they are willing to innovate, if they are willing to work with researchers and give them the type of services they need and open up the literature, I'm happy for them to stay. If they are not willing to innovate and all they want to do is keep their old business model and lock it all down, they have to go. That's my view.
You did use the word paper. I know you do. This is the man who insisted on having a chalk blackboard installed in his office when he moved here. I really don't see much sense in paper journal publications anymore. Simply the circulation and the production costs, there really is no excuse for that. Electronic digital documents are so much more agile. They can be shared so much more broadly and so much easier. I mean, you're from a developing country. Didn't you always suffer for the latest issue of Ecology or Journal of Theoretical Biology when your colleagues in the US or in Europe?
I didn't know that I was suffering. I just had to go to the university that had the complete collections. Now I realize that I was in horrible misery. But I'm not going to start that.
So, so,
How do you comment on students' drafts?
ooh,
So this is somebody that I've just taught a course with on writing proposals to the National Science Foundation. And Rich's question is, how do I comment on students' drafts? And that is generally on paper, at least early drafts. But that's for a very good reason. If I go through a Word document and correct it, then the student's temptation will be just to hit accept all changes. But if the student makes the same error 50 times and has to correct that error 50 times, then probably, unless the student is not that bright, he or she will think about, oh, that's why I had to do that 50 times. So I think that's a different issue, Rich. That's a teaching thing. But I have bought myself an iPad now, and so at least for later drafts, I do a lot of the editing, not in Word, but on a PDF. So the student still has to go back and make each of those changes individually. All of my students are looking at me like, Town, I hate you.
I just wanted to make one comment on the paper issue. So I agree with you that publishers need to move into the digital age. But one thing that I do see at institutions in Mexico is that the subscription prices for a paper subscription versus an online subscription are far lower. And that has allowed some institutions to at least have a single paper copy in the library that all of their researchers can access and get copies from, whereas the online subscription prices are completely out of their range. Now, I think publishers could change that, but at least that paper option has been the only option for some institutions in Mexico, and I imagine other parts of the world. But the problem is that the pricing is set up that way. It really shouldn't be set up that way.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, sorry, I'm yelling into the mic, that the end of print publication isn't the end of reading in paper, right? Like, it just means that I don't need all of the record printed for me. I can pick and choose what I choose to interface deeply with in paper. And I actually do read that way. Like, I can scan things digitally, and I like that they're searchable. And there are a lot of benefits to being able to sort of like carry them around on a thumb drive or in the cloud or whatever. But when I really need to deeply interface with a piece of research, I need to print it out. But I wonder if that will be true for people who, like, in 20 years, will our brains are fairly plastic, and you're, I think, probably in a much better position academically to speak to that than I am. But will our reading practices have adapted to be able to interface with digital in the same way that many of our brains interface with paper?
I imagine
that's a huge
that's true.
question.
I mean, if you look, a lot of my students, they don't print anything out. I mean, it's all digital to them, and they're perfectly comfortable with that. Whereas if I'm going to submit a manuscript, my personal manuscript, I still need to print it out and write on it with a pen to be able to see all my typos. Like that still needs to happen at some stage in the process for me. But I imagine that is becoming less and less common. Yeah.
Not very common for me to defend paper publishing, but there is one more advantage of the library getting the paper copy. If we subscribe to the electronic subscription, and then, of course it won't happen in the state of Kansas, but imagine the state budget were to go down the toilet, and we have to end some of our electronic subscriptions. Guess what?
Gone.
They're gone. Whereas all those old...
Do we have a mic?
Of course, but the more piratic of them, you stop your subscription, and you don't own any piece of it. So, yeah, of course it depends on the particular contract terms, but you really, there is a value to having that paper publication.
That's a good point.
So back to some specific questions, I wanted to come back to tenure. So instead of looking 10 to 20 years into your future, we're looking, what, in Mexico, 5 or 6 years?
It varies a lot. We have a different system, but yeah, about 5 years, let's say.
Okay. So I can very easily imagine some more senior colleagues of yours saying, why are you doing so much open access publishing? Shouldn't you be doing serious neuroscience or serious biophysics?
Yeah, so I'm in a little bit of an unusual position in that I'm in a physics department, well, not at Laurier, at UNAM. I'm in a physics department, and if anyone knows that physics has sort of, in many respects, solved the open access problem a long time ago. So they have an open repository called arXiv. In various branches of physics, 80–90% of the literature is published there before it ever gets to a traditional journal. And so if you talk to a lot of physicists, they're like, yeah, so what's the problem? We make everything open. We solved that. What are you guys doing? And what's wrong with you biologists? And so I don't think that I'll get a lot of pushback in that sense within my particular department. I do get pushback when I speak to other neuroscientists because they say, where are your neuron papers? Where are your Nature Neuroscience? Where are your Journal of Neuroscience papers? Those are all closed access journals. But I think that's getting less so. So we've seen a few studies actually in the last few months where the overall approval for open access publishing and research is increasing. And I think our people are realizing these are real, rigorous venues. I think one of the things that's helping change that is open peer review. So a lot of people were saying when many of these open access journals came out, well, the peer review process in these journals is not rigorous. Well, if you have open peer review, you can very easily go and check that for yourself. You can read those reviews and see how rigorous that process was and see how long it took and see, in some cases, who was reviewing the papers. And I've been using that as a tool to say, if you don't think that the paper published in PeerJ, for example, was rigorous, why don't you go online and check out what the reviewers had to say and look at all the changes I made, because there's version control, right? So they can see not only the reviewers' responses, but my responses, all the changes, and that helps to increase the credibility surrounding these journals. And I think the more that we're seeing that, the more that researchers are starting to be confident in these venues, and the more that they're seeing good science published there, the more that they're realizing that these are perfectly legitimate publishing venues. So I think, yes, I will get some pushback from the more traditional scientists, but I think that will get less and less as I go through my career. And I hope that within 5 years' time, that's really not an issue.
So let's go a little bit deeper on kind of the dark side of open access. One of my favorite YouTube videos is The Third Reviewer. If anybody wants a good laugh, look for that on YouTube and you'll enjoy it. But right at the end, it's essentially a World War II movie about Hitler that's been subtitled to talk about the third reviewer.
Yeah.
And of course, the third reviewer is the one who messes up everything and causes you all sorts of trouble. And right at the end, in the middle of this long rant about the third reviewer using all sorts of foul language, the comment is, well, I guess we'll just have to send it to an open access journal. And,
Yeah.
I think 10 years ago, that was a really serious problem for this movement, 5–10 years ago even, where you had the top rank journals, which were closed access, and the open access journals, of which a few made it into the higher ranks, but not many. And now we've got more and more really neat high-end options that are completely open access. So I think the problem's going away, but we still have these, what I call parasites, and they tend to be intestinal parasites in my book, but these open access journals, usually it's the International Journal of, in one of my fields, the most prestigious journal is American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, and there's this American Journal of, I think, Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. It's to the point where even I got fooled at one point. And apparently what they do is just, publish some electronic object and charge you a hefty sum. What do we do about them as kind of a diluting factor to the importance of this field?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, this vanity publishing problem certainly didn't originate with open access. It's been around for a while. I think in general, someone was talking about, I get a lot of spam email. Yeah, ignore those, delete those. If journals are emailing you, typically not a good sign. There are ways you can sort of protect yourself. If you've never heard of that journal or that publisher, don't go with them. There are ways, but I think the biggest thing, they are not going to disappear. The best thing we can do is educate academics as to how to protect themselves against that, kind of the warning signs. And again, educate people as to the signs of a credible venue. Do they have open peer review? How long does that peer review process take? If they're getting you an entire review in 24 hours, I'm pretty sure that is not a rigorous review process. Almost no reviewers respond in 24 hours. So there are little warning signs like that, and we can educate people. And we should, because this is one of the most pervasive myths that really kind of serves as a roadblock against people viewing these journals as credible outlets. But I think we just have to keep educating ourselves and educating our peers every time you kind of hear people talking about this problem. Well, first of all, this is not an open access problem. This is a vanity publishing problem. It's been there for a while. And these are the ways you can protect yourself. And I think that's all we can do. We are not going to wipe them off the planet, just like we're not going to wipe, in any type of venue where there's a potential for profit, there will be parasites in the system. That's just a reality. But we have to educate ourselves and see the warning signs of those. Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to go pretty soon back to the audience and give the opportunity for a couple more questions. But just kind of one last thing that I'll ask of you is, given the diversity of kind of social media and other internet platforms, I'm thinking academia.edu, ResearchGate, Twitter, Facebook, Google+, what have you. For those who are either beginning professorships here or who will begin professorships sometime soon, how can you leverage those new media or those new platforms to build a really solid tenure packet?
Ooh. So I would say, first of all, don't try to do them all, because that's going to be overwhelming, and you will also risk looking distracted and looking as if you are spending way too much time building your social media profile. So you have to balance that. So I would say if you are going to pick any, have a personal website and have a Twitter account. So those I don't use. I probably have an Academia EDU account and a research. I don't use them. And I don't find them particularly useful for my personal use. But I have found having a personal website and having a Twitter account extremely useful for networking, for getting the word out, finding collaborators, explaining my research. Those have been, indispensable. So how do you use those with tenure pack? It's much harder. And I'll tell a true story here. So I haven't been up for tenure review, but I have been up for particular evaluations, and we have a national system of investigators and several other evaluations that happen in our institutions in Mexico. And the question always comes, what do you put on your CV? And so do I include altmetrics? So for people who aren't familiar with altmetrics, these are kind of alternative scores. So how many times has my article been tweeted or, bookmarked or sent out, how many people have linked to my blog, things like that. You can log all of those. But I was told at some point in my career, don't put those on your CV. Because there were certain people that said, you will look distracted, you will look less than legitimate. And so you have to balance those. In some departments, that can work really well if people are amenable to those types of statistics, those types of measures. In other departments, that can work against you. But I would say the first step is to track them. If you don't know what those scores are, you can't use them. So there are things like altmetric.com. I use Impact Story. Has anyone here heard of Impact Story? So the idea being to show your real impact rather than your impact factor. They have this great motto that says, I am more than my H-index. And you looked up my Google Scholar profile. My H-index is very, very low. But I don't think that represents my full kind of impact in the scholarly world. And so Impact Story lets you put all of those products on there, not just your articles, but your blog posts, your slide decks, your code outputs, whether you shared a data set, all of that stuff that comes out of being an academic, you put that on there, and they are tracking for you. How many people are talking about this in a social media venue? How many people are using this? How many people are citing it? How many people are linking back to it? And give you a fuller picture. And you can take that, assuming they're amenable. Take that as part of your application to a job or your application for a grant or your tenure packet and say, okay, so you guys are using these statistics, that's fine, but I don't think they show you the whole picture. Here's my whole picture. Whether they decide to use that or not, that's their issue, but, it affects you as well. But I think you can track that for yourself. And you can use that whenever the opportunity presents itself. And I think we should be encouraging tenure and promotion boards, hiring committees to be considering some of these alternative metrics, to be looking at more than an H-index or an impact factor. And hopefully over time those things will become more accepted. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I actually don't have a personal website or a Twitter account, so. But that last point you made is actually a really good one. Several people here in the audience are at the senior level and are on those promotion and tenure committees. And a very useful thing that we can do is to ask the questions about article level activity.
Yes.
Which is to say, Mary published 10 papers and John published 8. And Mary had 2 science papers and John didn't, whatever. But instead of just asking in what journals were those publications, we can also ask the article level metrics,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of people are coming to see as more meaningful. So remember that.
Yeah.
Those of you who are on promotion and tenure committees, ask those questions about how people's articles are being used, communicated, passed on, shared, bookmarked, downloaded, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So just with the last few minutes we have left, some more questions from the audience.
I have a mic here for her.
Microphone.
So my question has to do with your impact beyond the University Research Committee. I'm speaking from someone in the libraries and not experiencing what you're experiencing. But if you wish to have impact beyond just other researchers, but actually people in practice, I guess it's a comment and just sort of a question to see if I'm assuming correctly. I would assume that the blog posts are important for that impact for practice. So if you're getting into evidence-based medicine, evidence-based practice in other fields like social welfare and I'm blanking, but if you're getting into those practices, I would think that your research would be extremely important if it's being tweeted, if it's being, if your blogs are being noted. And that's not going to be evident in citations. So doesn't that have some merit on committees as well?
I think it should. I mean, patient advocacy groups is a really a good example. You're working in public health and you want to reach patient advocacy groups. Twitter is a really, really good way to reach those groups. And, but as you mentioned, I mean, the scientific article as we currently have it is not a really good way to communicate science. It communicates science to people within your little niche, but it does not communicate well to people outside that circle. And so, yeah, the blog posts or some other form of communicating your science in a way that those groups that are outside your circle, your academic circle, are going to understand and be able to use, I think is hugely important. So I don't know if you guys know that there's a tool called UpGoer 5 online. And so this only has the, I think it's, is it 1,000? Most, yeah, 1,000, most common words in the English language. And you're only allowed to use those words. And so one exercise that came out was, can you write about your science only using those words? And so the first time I tried, I said, okay, I'll paste a scientific abstract of my work into this thing. And it highlights red, whatever words are unallowed, not allowed. Red, solid, block of red. Okay. So I said, okay, well, I'll grab the blurb from my website, because I know, I work to make that more accessible in terms of language. No, still all red. Okay, it took me a really long time to be able to describe my research just using those words. Now, obviously, patient advocacy groups, they're capable of understanding more extensive vocabulary than this, but I think it's a really good exercise in how do we communicate our science in terms that other people can understand. And this is something that we're not currently, I think, training graduate students or postdocs in particularly well. In fact, we're encouraging jargon a lot. Jargon is this hallmark of whether you belong to the in-group that's talking like this. Well, can we all be, okay, that doesn't make you look more intelligent, just makes your science less accessible. And I got that quote from somewhere and I can't remember where it's from. But it's very poignant in the sense that, yeah, okay, so there is open access and then there's accessibility in terms of the actual language that we're using. And I think that's hugely important to not forget. Yeah.
Just blogging doesn't do it, because you can have blog posts that are still unintelligible.
Yes. That's true.
To me, the big challenge is, can you explain it to somebody who's not in academia at all,
Yeah.
or an English professor? Nothing against any English professors. My dad was an English professor, and he would challenge me to explain to him what the hell I was doing in my research. But I have, sectors of my family. Kind of one sector is primary school teachers, and another is a bunch of business people, and a third is, kind of working people. And it's a big challenge when you get that question of, what is it that you do? And if you can't explain it to that uncle who, is a boiler maker, then you probably can't explain it to much of anybody from the broader world outside of academia. And that's scary. But there's an academia-specific benefit as well. If you're restricted to your own in-crowd jargon, you're also probably going to be pretty bad at finding exciting collaborations. I'm an organismal biologist. My in-crowd is across the street in the Biodiversity Institute. If I can't explain what I do to, a neuroscientist or a psychologist or a humanist or a librarian, we probably can't get beyond, hi, my name is Town, to anything of any interest that is academic. And some of the most exciting things I've done in 23 years here is cross-department. So learning how to talk outside of your box is crucial also for yourself, not just for, educating the broader public. Another question.
Hi, can I go?
Sorry, I'm sorry.
I have the mic.
Hold on.
So we are recording this for use in our undergraduate speak project, which is will be a documentary film about open access at KU, and it focuses specifically on the role that undergraduates can play in this conversation. So I was hoping you could take a moment and talk specifically to the audience who will eventually see that film. Again, our audience is undergraduates, and specifically undergraduates who don't necessarily see a future for themselves in the scholarly publishing system, why this should matter to them, why they should care, how they can get involved.
That's a great question. So I mean, in my experience, of all the groups that I go around to, students and postdocs and faculty, and students are actually one of the most passionate and one of the most effective advocacy groups for open research and open science in general. And you know, a lot of them have grown up in a file sharing era, in a digital era, and many of them are also starting to think about a lot of social justice issues, right? So you were saying this is a social justice issue. This is an issue of access to knowledge as a human right. And I think a lot of undergraduates respond to that. They understand that that is a concern. They want to make a difference. They're in that stage of the career where they want to have a real impact in the world. And I think this is somewhere where they can have that impact. Students are in a good position because they can organize. There are student government groups. There are all kinds of student groups on campus. And one speaker that we had at OpenCon last year, this is a conference for students and early career researchers, said, one of the reasons that as a student I'm in a powerful position is I am a consumer. I am a paying customer of this university. And so if I come to a provost or someone in an administrative position and I say, this is an issue that's important to me, open access, open textbooks, right? They have to listen because these are that's the academic body, that is the lifeblood of the university. And so I think that undergraduates are in a perfect position to be able to say, this is important to me, I would like you to listen to me, and we're gonna take some action on this issue. And we've seen that be incredibly successful with student groups. So they have, you know, single-handedly passed open access policies at their own universities, created open access advocacy groups for their region of the world. So yeah, students are crucial in this.
I think anybody who's going to spend 4 years of her or his life at a university is probably not going to want to, you know, walk down the hill at the end of those 4 years and hear this big iron door slam shut as soon as he or she loses that KU account. So openness ought to be really big. You know, you come out of here with a Bachelor's of Science or a Bachelor of Arts, you probably will spend your lifetime doing some degree of learning. And you know, none of us wants to have to go and pay $150 for the textbook of the class that you didn't take. Rather, we'd love to see open textbook resources. One may read about on the news how, you know, 5 cups of coffee a day are actually good for you or bad for you or not.
Good for you. Good for you.
Just because you do it doesn't make it good for you. But wouldn't it be nice that one of these people that we've spent 4 years teaching to be inquisitive, that they can go and look at the data, right? And you know, you may also find yourself in the sort of situation that I found myself, where it's like you have to become an expert on a field in a day. You know, in that case, it was a medical thing, but it could be any number of things. It could be legal, it could be whatever. The degree to which academic activity is behind a paywall of some sort, or just behind a selfish wall, is knowledge that's off limits to you. And I would hope that, KU grads and other undergraduates around the world would be the community that would be most desirous of not ever running into those walls. So I think we're running low on time. Let's do one more question because I pointed in this direction. And then I think we can continue discussions informally.
Well, I think you've already answered this question to an extent, but I was just hoping you could comment in a general sense on the relation between your open research and the general public, sort of construed very broadly. Does it change the sense of who you're writing for? Like Martin Eve said on Friday in his keynote, that Wikipedia is the 5th largest driver of traffic to scholarly articles. And I'm curious, are you writing still for the research community with the expectation that other people may read it, or are you really writing for the public, sort of in a general sense?
Yeah, so I think in thinking about these accessibility issues for research, it's made me think about how I write my articles differently, and also this issue of mega journals, right? So it used to be that you're often submitting to a discipline-specific journal in which everyone will understand your jargon, and now that's not the case. So if I submit to PeerJ, not everybody in that journal or that works for that journal or reviews for that journal is a neuroscientist. And so those two factors kind of made me think a lot more carefully about how am I writing not just my blog posts or my tweets or anything, but my scientific articles. So in my last article, I made a concerted effort to write in a more accessible way. I don't know how successful I was with that. If I put it into UpGarf, I would still probably be all red, maybe 80% red this time. But it's definitely been something that I've been thinking about now in going back to my scientific articles and saying, is there a way that I can explain this with less jargon and less, just fancy speak that's unnecessary, That also happened I decided to share a data set that was underlying one of these articles. And that also got me thinking a lot about accessibility, right? So dumping my spreadsheet with all my horrible coded genetic jargon, that didn't make any sense to anybody who wasn't in that tiny little circle of Drosophila researchers, right? So I had to find a way to translate all of that into something that somebody else could understand and use, because otherwise, what's the point of putting my data online if nobody can use it? So I've been thinking a lot about not just the articles, but the data and even potentially notebooks. There's now people putting their lab notebooks online. Can you write that in a way that somebody else could understand it? Right? Because hopefully when you leave the lab 5 years later and somebody comes on and they want to do the same experiments or similar, they can go back and understand that. Because otherwise, why do we have those lab books there? So it's definitely something that I've been thinking about in terms of language spanning all our research outputs.